Going to take a look at some key environmental issues in the Foundry. And of course, with heavy amounts of industrialization, there's no doubt we're going to also get some air pollution associated with that. Why? But just in general, of course, we're going to, with the switch from going from animate energy, so essentially animals powering how we move from one place to another, to cars and railroads that require the burning of fossil fuels. Of course, we're going to have subsequently changes. Now, this is not a discussion about climate change. This is just simply a discussion about smog, which is something we associate with industrial areas. So what we're looking at is kind of got to put things in perspective. This is the St. Lawrence River, Ontario. So this is kind of looking from the northeast, looking towards the southwest, looking towards the Great Lakes. And so you can see that smog layer. It's below the layer of the clouds that we see associated with the Rust Belt. So one of the things is, you ever see smoke in the air or something in the air that looks like smoke? If it's white, it's just water vapor. It's either clouds or steam. But if it has any bit of color, any bit of gray, or of course brown, that's definitely air pollution. It's essentially even burning of wood, burning of coal, whatever it is, it's definitely what we call anthropogenic, or it's of human creation, not water vapor created from God or whoever, from the weatherman or woman. And so another thing to note about this particular area is it has a high amount of acid rain. So it's not going to get into the dynamics of this, but this comes also from a lot of industrial, a lot of automobile usage, creates sulfuric acid. This creates acid rain. And so we see this map here in 1985 of where concentrations were the highest in the United States and overwhelmingly there in the Rust Belt. And if you can just imagine if the Canadian corridor was shown on this map, it would be right there in that reddish orange color area as well. So it's definitely also part of the Rust Belt. But even there in the megalopolis, you can see higher rates, higher usages of automobiles, industry, buildings, and all these things that need various energy sources to power them here in the Foundry. We look at the map in 2008, though, we see that actually the acid rain has actually declined. So what's going on there? So one of the things is, guy named Bill Clinton said, "Oh, this is me. This is because I enacted all this policy, which helped to reduce the environmental harm in this area." Actually, no. It was deindustrialization. It's actually the decline in industries in this area. One would say the benefits of the outsourcing and the loss of jobs and loss of industry is that we see less acid rain being dumped in this particular area. So it's kind of a byproduct of deindustrialization. Now, no doubt there's been improvements in environmental policy. There's also been that as well. And Bill Clinton, he definitely had a role. But this is mostly because of actually the loss of jobs and the loss of industry, which helps to explain why we see improvements in acid rain in this particular area. But nonetheless, we still see some problems. This is a map that shows a proportional symbol map that shows where certain areas have higher rates of toxic air, especially for school children. So this could be of importance for us. But you really see that they're, in particular, there in the Rust Belt. Megalopolis, not so much, but in the Rust Belt, very, 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 very bad air. Another key concern is actually the urban heat island effect. So in this particular area, the Foundry, one kind of the characteristics is do get hot summers in this particular region. And so we see this is a temperature map. So what we're doing is it's a thermal map, and so essentially we're putting on our night vision goggles. So what we're detecting is hotter surfaces are white, cooler surfaces are blue. And so obviously the water is going to be cool. You can see that over here on the bottom left. But these white areas are areas that are very, very, very hot. And so when we have very much these urban environments that are very built up, we have also a lot of cars. And so essentially what happens is it creates a situation for urban areas to actually have very, very hot temperatures, much hotter and much warmer than you would find in rural areas. So what's going on there is you have black surfaces, asphalt, roads. You have buildings, metal buildings, glass and steel. All those things do a good job of holding in heat. And so as they hold in heat, then they add and build even more to the heat to the surface. Add to that, you have higher rates of air pollution. The air pollution kind of acts as a blanket, kind of blocks and holds in a lot of that heat, especially throughout the day. Why does this matter? In the Foundry, is one of the key concerns health-wise is actually people dying of heat strokes in the summertime. And so one of the things that geographers are coming up with is we're using our goggles from the sky to find hot areas, but then we're also adding on top of that socioeconomic data. Where do we find old people? Where do we find poor people? Where do we find people that don't have the amenities that they could then fight off a heat stroke? Because come on, it's a first world problem. You shouldn't be dying of being too hot outside. And so this is just a way to showcase these urban environments which characterize the Foundry, but also keep in mind these are environments, and as I'll talk about later in this chapter, in which you have a stark contrast in terms of where people live, low income areas, high income areas, and so on. So that's Buffalo. We can also see that in Baltimore. Very, very dense, very much an urban environment and through this particular area, and also associated with lower income areas of Baltimore. And so this is a map that shows the density, and so you can see high density, but you can also see how those parks, so green spaces play a key role in cooling areas. So another thing that geographers are doing is they're saying, okay, you have these a lot of abandoned homes, a lot of vacant properties. Let's just maybe clear them, put in parks, put in green spaces. What's that going to do? It's going to do two things. It's going to help to cool down these very, very hot urban environments, especially in these low-income areas, but it's also going to provide recreational space. It's also going to provide space for kids to go out and run. So when you live in a very crowded area, maybe apartment complex, having green space is very crucial for reducing obesity rates, for increasing participation rates in athletics and sports. So you kind of see how this is more than just environmental issues, how they can also dovetail very nicely with socioeconomic issues as well. Same with